Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, September 17th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Marshall game is in 4 days. The game against Michigan in 74 days. Going to be joined today by Ross Fulton of BuckeyeHuddle.com. And when we're joined by Ross, we're sponsored by Jeff Ruby's of Columbus, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steak, seafood, and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus, check out the menu, and make a reservation today. So, all right, normally on one of these shows, we would be breaking down all the stuff that we saw from the Ohio State offense, the Ohio State defense in the previous weekend. Well, there was no Ohio State offense or Ohio State defense last weekend. They had the week off. So instead, today, we're going to be looking at some of the other big-name programs around the country. Teams may be doing a little better or a little worse than perhaps we thought going into the season, and having Ross take a little bit of a deep dive on some of the whys behind that. And Ross, you know our audience. If they don't want to talk about Ohio State, they want to talk about Michigan. So we are going to talk about Michigan first. Tony Gerdeman and I did more than an hour on Michigan on Sunday on a live show. And my conclusion from watching them is they only really have three problems on offense. Their offensive line has some significant issues. Their quarterback play isn't very good, and they don't really have a lot of talent in the wide receiver room. So have I misdiagnosed anything there? And if I have that correct, how big of a concern is that in terms of having any kind of a functional offense moving forward?
Yeah, I would add their other problem is they continue to play the lesser running back of the two, principally. I mean, I think that I know Donovan Edwards has had some big runs against Ohio State. If you take those runs out, his career has been a lot of very mediocre production. I think Khalil Mullins is the better running back and more consistent. And I know they wanted Edwards for his explosiveness, but ironically, it was Mullins on Saturday generating the explosive runs. But yes, your diagnosis is correct. They have significant issues at center and right tackle. The guys that were starting there were not either of whom were really expected to start there in the season, and the production has not been there. They've gone back and forth at center. The pass protection is really bad, exacerbated by Davis Warren panicking under pressure, throwing off his back foot. Making bad decisions. I think from a general level, I still am shocked. I told, some Michigan partisans that I like to talk to, like Space Coyote and Manuel XL on Twitter prior to the season that I'm like, Michigan is going to play Alex Orji and run a read run offense, right? And I just am shocked they didn't go that direction. I think Orji obviously is very limited as a passer, but your points all remain true. They don't have to play a game manager style at quarterback. You need people around him that can help, and they're super limited. And so, the problem now is obviously in the middle of the season, if you didn't really prepare to do that. I mean, we saw with Orji on Saturday, they could do a little stuff. I mean, they did stuff with JJ McCarthy too. And last year, they can run, zone read. They can run some bash concepts, power read. So it's hard though in season to really lean into that. I mean, I think they don't do much RPO stuff. They can maybe do some reliefs, where he reads pre-snap. It's I got three receivers over two defensive backs. I'm going to pull it and throw the bubble screen. But I just think it's going to limit their upside in general on offense. I mean, it's going to be I said after the Texas game, people were bashing on the Michigan defense, and I do think that they're not as good as they were last year. They were really good last year. They're still probably a top 10 defense. They don't have the depth. I think Martindale was a step down from what Jesse Minter was doing. And he's introduced some so I think he had to step back. He put in a bunch of his NFL, amoeba concepts where people are lined up all in the line of scrimmage, and then they bust plays because it's, college still, and they don't have as much practice time, and you're not dealing with the best players in the world. And so they seem to sort of dial it down and simplify things on Saturday. But all that's to say, the defense is good enough, right? To win. It's still probably a top 10 defense, but when you're in the 60s offensively, in advanced stats, and you're in Iowa territory.
And if you were Sharon Moore right now, what would you do? Are you going to put Alex Orji in there and you're going to try and just do a quarterback run and ground-based attack because you don't have a great passer? Or are you desperately hoping that Jack Huddle comes back from whatever his injury situation is and he can magically fix it? I mean, Colston Loveland went down with an injury on Saturday. I have not seen an update on his status yet. How do you fix this for Michigan? Where can they go? Because as you said, you're limited in how much you can really change once you're in the middle of the season.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think it's sort of an indictment of their preseason process that they didn't they sort of wanted to just like run back what they did last year. And, when you got to deal with the players you have, like, they're all gone from last year. So you can't really run the same offense. I think they announced that Orji's going to start. I don't know. The Jack Tuttle situation is odd to me. I'm not really sure Jack Tuttle's a savior in general. I mean, have the same problems where you're like, you have one good receiver and your tight end and Loveland, and that's about it. I think you just lean into everything you've got in terms of read concepts, as I said, like try to mix in some reliefs, some easy throws to like keep Loveland involved. You hope that gets you an extra, from the 60s in offensive efficiency to like the 40s, right? Like, I mean, I don't think there's going to be any sort of grand, skies partying and it all of a sudden they're a good offensive team. They just have to be less bad and like hope that the combination of when you're reading people, it minimizes obviously your offensive line's issues. They can't really pass protect anyway. So I mean, I think their passing game is pretty much sunk no matter what. So I guess you try to run it as much as you can.
Well, one team that has sort of shined a bright light on some of the issues that Michigan has had this year is Texas. They went up to Ann Arbor and just thumped the Wolverines a couple weeks ago. That's another team with a little bit of uncertainty at quarterback right now. Quinn Ewers having an injury, Arch Manning stepping in and looking pretty darn good against UTSA. We'll caution, this is not the UTSA you are familiar with for the last few years. Texas State put up 49 on them a week ago, so Texas putting up 56 on them does not necessarily move the needle quite as much as it might have in previous years. But they feel like they have looked as consistent and as good as you sort of expected them to, at least in my mind, coming into the season, where they were sort of perceived as broadly at least a Final Four caliber team. What have you seen out of Texas so far, and do you feel like have your expectations for them changed at all so far this year?
Yeah, I mean, I would not want them. If I was Texas, I would not want to be without Quinn Ewers for an extended stretch. Putting aside, the Arch Manning perpetual hype. Like, I mean, Ewers is probably a first round quarterback, and I think he's the strength of their team, especially with what Sark does with just so RPO heavy, and that's what really challenges you. And he's a great play caller. I still, so like MGO blog, like Brian Cook and those guys do, extensive breakdowns of scheme stuff post game. And, I think their assessment it wasn't like Texas defensively was overwhelming Michigan with talent. It's just Michigan was that bad. And I caution a little bit, like to our previous discussion, like I think Texas is maybe getting a little bit too much credit for going to beat with Michigan, which is maybe like the 7th best team right now in the Big Ten. I think, Indiana statistically is doing far better than Michigan is right now and has better quarterback play. That being said, like Sark's going to always challenge you. They sort of play that 3 down front, odd front that try to spill everything, sort of the Big 12 defense, for lack of a better word, even though I know they're now in the SEC, that, creates some different blocking challenges. But I'm still not convinced that they, from top to bottom, they lost their defensive tackles to the NFL, have the same talent level as Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia. I don't know, but they may be able to overcome that with the quarterback play and play calling.
Well, we probably will not have a great sense for what Texas is again, any more of a sense anyway. For the next few weeks, they have Louisiana Monroe this week, Mississippi State the following week, and then a week off before the Red River shootout against Oklahoma on October 12th, and then the Georgia Bulldogs coming to Austin on October 19th. And by that point, we should know a lot more about what the Texas Longhorns are. Last team I wanted to talk to you about was the Oregon Ducks, because they came into the season basically with the same level of expectation as Texas, where you look at just about anyone's playoff projections and everyone had them sort of penciled into the Final Four at the very least. And then they looked terrible against Idaho. And then they looked pretty not great against Boise State for long stretches. Played a good first half against Oregon State and then really hit the Jets in the second half. It feels to me like the issues there are largely in the trenches. They made a change at center around halftime against Boise State, and that seems like maybe that has addressed some of the issues. But has the projection for you for Oregon materially changed, and if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, again, I should say in Texas's favor, they have very good offensive line play. Oregon does not, and I mean that's going to limit them. I think a lot of the preseason projections are based on the fact that they do have a very good wide receiving core. They have very good running back. They have Dylan Gabriel. I just think it's just very hard to overcome poor interior offensive line player. It's at least going to limit. So you see sort of like a herky-jerky nature to them, that they have some explosiveness, but then they'll have setbacks. Like Texas, they're another team that's just going to run pass options to death against you. They do it in such a way that they kind of expose their quarterback to getting hit a lot. We talked, we conversely, like last week, we were talking about how Chip Kelly does some things on the backside of RPOs with his offensive line to protect the quarterback in terms of pass setting. So they sort of opened Gabriel up to quite a bit of shots, which, I guess can challenge you in the sense of like, you gotta, they're reading those people, but it's just really sort of playing with fire a little bit, both just in terms of his, not just his health, but just in terms of like the boom or bust of the offense. And so I just think they're going to continue to be sort of streaky, for lack of a better word, a little bit up and down. They'll have some great drives and then they'll have some duds. But, I think they're going to obviously still be a challenge. Like if you look at like the advanced stats right now, like Ohio State's sort of comfortably the first team in the Big Ten. And then you sort of have Oregon and Penn State at that next tier. And obviously, Ohio State has to go to Oregon. They can make some plays on defense too. I think they'll continue to pose a challenge just because of their explosiveness, even if their offensive line sort of limits their upside.
Yeah, it feels like one of those teams where the talent is just good enough that it's probably going to be able to drag them to a pretty good number of wins this year and probably have them. I think there were people who were looking at that Oregon game maybe a week ago after the Idaho and Boise State games and going, "Oh, Ohio State's got that one in the bag," and it was I think it's probably a little early to be projecting that. Is there anyone else in the country who, any other teams at the top of the sport or anywhere else that you feel are, either some big red flags right now or are substantially ahead of where you thought they might be?
Yeah, obviously it's hard to ignore Georgia only scoring 13 points against Kentucky. I still wonder a little bit about they seem to really be missing Brock Bowers, about their overall talent at the skill positions. And how much Carson Beck last year was sort of propped up by the talent surrounding him versus his play. I still think USC is dangerous and maybe still a little underrated. They obviously have a big game coming up at Michigan this week, and we'll see how that defense holds up. They're going to have to prepare, as I said, for Michigan basically changing to be a read-run team to the extent that Michigan's able to do that. But I just think they're getting really high quarterback play. They're explosive on the outside. I think, Michigan has, defensively, like Texas did take advantage of some things in the secondary and Michigan's second corner. And so I still think, in terms of Big Ten picture, like thinking ahead, like I still think USC is also definitely a potential team to make it to Indianapolis in the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, that was a team I was kind of about ready to sort of write off the Lincoln Riley era, and all of a sudden now they have a defense and they look like they maybe have an offense again as well. And so it is perhaps I was a little premature there on that one, but
in SP Plus, if you take out the preseason projections, Indiana's the eighth best team statistically right now. So I know it's hard to say, but I think he's a good coach. He brought in like 40 some transfers. That number may be a little high, but not too much. They're getting good quarterback play. And so I think that they are, like for instance, Michigan has to go play at Indiana. I think right now I would call that a toss up game. And so I think that they're going to cause some problems, as will Illinois. So, they're sort of like as I said, they're sort of like a mid-tier depth right now in the Big Ten, where there's teams that I don't think they're necessarily playoff teams, but I think they could cause some problems for some of the potential playoff teams.
Well, Ohio State does not have Illinois on the schedule this year, but they do have Indiana coming to Columbus, so we get to watch that one. Michigan does have to go to Bloomington. Yeah, that is potentially a little bit of an issue there. Would not have necessarily expected to think that 6 weeks ago or 6 months ago, but Kurt Cignetti, Curtis Rourke, yeah, definitely some positive up arrow trends there in Bloomington. So thank you to Ross for joining me. Always appreciate having him on to share his insights on the Buckeyes and everything else. And of course, we once again thank our sponsors, Jeff Ruby's of Columbus, the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus, named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus, check out the menu, and make a reservation today. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.